Here's my gear. This is my gear list. So Sony A7 III x2, 70 to 200, 2.8, 35 f1.4, hold fast moneymaker. You can see it on me there. That's like it.
Is that what you use at weddings too?
Yeah. So yeah, I can go back. I don't wear anything different than when I photograph. That's one of my favorite things. Like, I'm not bringing extra gear. I don't bring microphones. I don't use any audio in the keepsake films. I'm not bringing like a gimbal or a monopod. Like, everything is just handheld.
Do you have like go-to frame rate? Or?
Yeah, I definitely have a style. That's a great question. Matt asked about frame rates, and so we're gonna go over that. Frame rate is like how many frames per second your video is, which is super important. You'll notice everything I showed you is slow-mo. I would say that's like a element of my style. To me, that's as much of a creative choice as like aperture. If you like wide open apertures, I do. I kind of leave it wide open all day. Like, I almost never stop down my cameras. Like, if it's f1.4, I'll just leave it at f1.4. Very, very rarely do I stop it down. Frame rate's a creative choice. That's what I look like photographing. I'm just like walking around. Like, my bag has a bunch more lenses. I kind of just leave them in the bag in the car. Yeah. I know. Pro tip. Here's the key features. If you were going to do this or try it, this is worth writing down. High frame rate, minimum 60 frames per second. I use 120. The Sony cameras I use can shoot 120 frames per second in 1080p. In-body stabilization is nice. That's where the sensor, like you guys know about image stabilization in your lenses, like every 70 to 200 kind of has it, no matter what the brand. My camera's sensor can move too. So if you have a prime on that doesn't have it, now all of a sudden it can kind of work to help stabilize your footage. That mixed with slow-mo, and you have some really clean handheld shots. Autofocus, I use autofocus for all the videos, obviously for photos too. And lenses with image stabilization are a bonus. Like, my 70 to 200 handheld is more stable than any of my other lenses, like, which is kind of mind-blowing. I can hold a shot from really far away, like it just holds it, and it's funny to me. And I know the Nikon Z6, D850, D5 on hybrid, their sensor doesn't move, but the lens is so good. Like, you can do really good handheld footage with those cameras too, with that lens. Is that good? If I didn't shoot Sony, this would probably be the order I would shoot. Or buy a camera, I would shoot Nikon D850s, even though I don't necessarily want the high resolution. Right after that would be the Z6, because it doesn't have as much resolution, but it doesn't have 2 memory card slots, so for me I don't like that, but it's still a good camera. The D5, it's just really expensive. 1DX Mark II is Canon's version, that can do that. Fuji X-T3, that's like a crop sensor camera, but very capable for photo and video, has really good features. That's a pretty, like, I really like my full frame photos. Like, the depth of field is the most shallow in them. And then Panasonic makes this thing called the GH5. That is also a really good camera. You guys have questions on gear, brands?
Okay, so when you output the video, it's like a raw version of a video, and then you like treat it in post, or is it just being output as a MP4?
That's a really good question. Okay, so he's asking like video. Video is different than photo. Everybody knows when you shoot, who doesn't shoot raw photos? Anyone? Everybody shoots raw photos. Raw photos are like your camera's, like, it's literally what the sensor saw. So every time you go and edit a raw photo, it's like you're doing all the work for the camera and you've got everything there was to work with. These cameras don't have raw video recording. If they did, you would have a lot of data. It would be really cool. Movie cameras, you can change white balance after, just like your photos. Some movie cameras, you can change the ISO after. Like, it's just the way they work. But when you shoot video on these cameras, it's really compressed. So think of it as like a super shitty JPEG, and that's what you're editing with. Like the shittiest JPEG ever. That's what you have to work with. It's 2 megapixels basically. And I'm gonna go over kind of how to manage that. Quick thought, I use the Sonys, they're so cheap. They're 2,700 bucks. That's wrong, they're 2,600 bucks, they're 25.99. They're full frame, super capable cameras. D850s are like $4,000. The memory cards are like 300 bucks a shot. And they're SLRs, so they're different, but they're still great. So if you're wanting to even just have a camera to play with, it's a cheap camera. You can get an adapter. If you shoot Canon, you can just jam your lenses on it and it works. I've changed how I shoot photos. I used to shoot always manual mode. Now I shoot AV mode, or aperture priority. Creatively, I usually stay wide open. Autofocus, I'm always using autofocus. Some cameras can't use autofocus in filming. So like if you have a 5D Mark III, like you don't have an option. So I use 120 frames per second video at 1080p at 100 megabits per second. That's your quality. It's like your compression rate. So if you save a JPEG, you know how you can go to like 0 to 12, or like in Lightroom exports, it's like 60, 80, kind of those numbers. 100 megabits per second is your compression. So the highest the camera goes, I choose. And then I just shoot everything shade white balance. You can't change white balance on video after the fact very easily. Like it's hard because you don't have a raw image to work with. I've found using that house, not the cloud, but the house one just gets me, and I know Nikon, if I shot Nikon, I'd choose the same setting, the house. It's easier to make a warm image cool than a cool image warm because it messes the skin up. So anyway, that's kind of the settings I have. Any questions on that?
So even if you're outside?
Yeah, so I think I have one on the boat. I like shot the whole thing. Like we're in the sun, and I tend to edit warmer anyway. My photos tend to be. I tend to just like sometimes I see a photo, I'm like, that's a little hot or a little warm, but I do it. But I like it. I like warm photos, and I find that it's just easier going warm to cool than cool to warm. If I was indoors, if I was shooting a hybrid film in a house and it was like this, no daylight at all, then I would change the white balance over. You could also use auto white balance in some situations. It's not a crime. I've just had really good luck where I can get the look I want on my videos by using the shade. Photo versus video, this one's really important. Like I mentioned a few of them. A white balance is really important. You can't change it like a raw file. Exposure, I shoot the AV mode because I find it's just like, it takes it out of my hands. The raw files on a Sony are like, I don't know, like D850s, Z6, even a 5D Mark IV, like if you're 2 stops out on a raw file, you're fine. And you know, so that's where, on the 5D Mark III it wasn't as easy, but I find like I'll just shoot AV for all my photos and videos, so my settings don't change between the two. And I find if it just like exposes how it thinks, it's usually the best way. I'll still roll the exposure compensation. Color, you use presets on raw files. You were asking about color. LUTs are for video, so if you want to Google how to color your video, look LUT. It stands for lookup tables. Most LUTs have a recommended way to shoot or to like set your camera. I think I wrote that wrong. They have a recommended way to set your camera up for that LUT. So it's not like a preset will work on, or any preset can work on any raw file sort of thing. LUTs are like you need to shoot your camera a certain way for that LUT to work, okay? But like if you look it up, there's like some great people on YouTube. You can buy a LUT for like 10 bucks or 15. Find something you like, search your exact brand of camera, and it'll tell you how to set your camera up, and and then when you put it in your editor, use that LUT, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm James Cameron. It looks amazing. Extra settings, again, if you buy a LUT, it tells you how to set up your camera for the video. I use a neutral profile with low contrast and low sharpening. So like, you know how you can pick like black and white, standard, vivid, all that? I pick like the neutral one and drop the contrast all the way down. The crappy part is then my photos in my preview are all like super shitty looking. Plus I'm on a Sony camera, which has the shittiest screen I've ever used on a camera. Like that back screen's like garbage. So that's why I shoot auto, because I don't know if I got the shot properly exposed or not.